Welcome back to another weekly recap video of the 2024-2025 NFL season, in which today we are going to be covering all 16 games for Week 18. If you like this type of content, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I appreciate all the support as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So without further ado, let's get straight into this one as we have the first game of the week on Saturday night between two AFC North divisional opponents, the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens defeated the Cleveland Browns 35-10. The Browns are 3-14, while the Ravens are 12-5 heading into the postseason. Bailey Zappi started for the Browns, going 16 for 31 with 170 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Dorian Thompson-Robinson also played a drive, going 2 for 3 for 13 yards. Deonta Foreman led the team in rushing with 27 yards, and Jerry Jeudy led the team in receiving with 63 yards. Jordan Akins also had a touchdown receiving. Lamar Jackson went 16 for 32 with 217 yards and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry led the team in rushing with 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. Rashad Bateman led the team in receiving with 76 yards and a touchdown. Mark Andrews also had a touchdown on the day as well. The first points of the game were scored on a pick six by the Baltimore defense, and heading into halftime they held a 14-3 lead over the Browns. The Browns could only muster one more touchdown as the Ravens pulled away with the 35-10 victory. The second Saturday game was between another AFC North divisional rivals, between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals, in which the Bengals beat the Steelers 19-17. The Bengals end the season at 9-8. The Steelers are 10-7, getting the 6th seed in the playoffs. Joe Burrow went 37 for 46 with 277 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Khalil Herbert led the team in rushing with 69 yards. Jamar Chase led the team in receiving with 96 yards and a touchdown. Russell Wilson went 17 for 31 with 148 yards and a touchdown. Najee Harris led the team in rushing with 36 yards and a touchdown. Pat Freiermuth led the team in receiving with 85 yards and a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Bengals touchdown on the opening drive. Heading into halftime, Cincinnati had a 13-7 lead over Pittsburgh, and then the Bengals scored 2 consecutive field goals to push their lead up to 19-7. The Steelers then scored a touchdown to make it 19-14, and then a field goal to make it 19-17 as the Bengals held on to the victory. The next game of the week was between the NFC South divisional matchups of the Atlanta Falcons and the Carolina Panthers, in which the Panthers beat the Falcons 44-38 in overtime. The Panthers end the season with a record of 5-12. The Falcons end their season at 8-9. Bryce Young went 25 for 34 with 251 yards and 3 touchdowns. Jalen Coker went 1 for 1 for 19 yards. Miles Sanders led the team in rushing with 66 yards and a touchdown. Bryce Young also had 24 yards on the ground with 2 touchdowns. Jalen Coker also led the team in receiving with 62 yards. Miles Sanders and Tommy Tremble and David Moore each had a touchdown on the day. Michael Penix Jr. went 21 for 38 with 312 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Bijan Robinson led the team in rushing with 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. Michael Penix also had a touchdown on the ground, as Drake London led the team in receiving with 187 yards and 2 touchdowns on the day. The first points of the game were scored by the Falcons on the opening drive with a field goal, which was then followed up by a Panthers field goal, and then we had a shootout in the first half as Atlanta led 24-17 heading into halftime. And later on in the second half, we had much more touchdowns from both teams as we headed into overtime at 38 apiece. The Panthers then got the drive in overtime and scored a touchdown to seal out the 44-38 victory over the Falcons. Next game of the week was between the Washington Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys, in which the Commanders beat the Cowboys 23-19. Commanders are 12-5. Cowboys finished the year at 7-10. Marcus Mariota went 15 for 18 with 161 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Daniels went 6 for 12 with 38 yards, and De'Ami Brown went 0 for 1. Marcus Mariota led the team in rushing with 56 yards and a touchdown. Terry McLaurin led the team in receiving with 62 yards and a touchdown. Zach Ertz had 44 yards and a touchdown as well. Trey Lance started going 24-34 with 244 yards. Rico Dowdle led the team in rushing with 72 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Tolbert led the team in receiving with 98 yards on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Dallas field goal on their opening drive. Heading into halftime, the score was 3-6 with Dallas in the lead. Dallas then scored a field goal to open up the second half, followed up by a Commanders touchdown and then a shootout between both teams as Dallas was leading 18-16. The Commanders then sealed it off with a touchdown on their final drive with a 23-19 victory over the Cowboys. Next game of the week was between the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers, in which the Bears beat the Packers 24-22. The Bears end the season at 5-12. Packers head to the playoffs with an 11-6 record. Caleb Williams went 21 for 29 with 148 yards and a touchdown. Keenan Allen went 0 for 1, throwing a pick, and DeAndre Swift led the team in rushing with 65 yards and a touchdown. DJ Moore led the team in receiving with 86 yards and a touchdown. Jordan Love went 7 for 12 and 69 yards, while Malik Willis went 10 for 13 with 136 yards. Emmanuel Wilson led the team in rushing with 73 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs also had a touchdown on the ground. Malik Heath led the team in receiving with 53 yards. The first points of the game were scored by a punt return touchdown by the Bears as they had a 7-0 lead, which was then followed up by a Packers field goal. Heading into halftime, the Bears were leading the Packers 14-3. Then the Bears were able to kick a final second field goal to pull off the 24-22 victory over the Packers. The next game of the week was between the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans, in which the Texans beat the Titans 23-14. The Texans are 10-7 heading into the playoff, while the Titans fall to 3-14 and secured the number 1 pick overall in the 2025 draft. Davis Mills went 22 for 21 with 128 yards. CJ Stroud went 6 for 6 with 50 yards and a touchdown. Dameon Pierce led the team in rushing with 176 yards and a touchdown. Robert Woods led the team in receiving with 39 yards, and Nico Collins had a touchdown on the day. Will Levis went 9 for 17 with 175 yards and a touchdown. Mason Rudolph went 7 for 9 with 70 yards. Tony Pollard led the team in rushing with 62 yards, and Calvin Ridley led the team in receiving with 76 yards, and Tay Martin also had a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Texans touchdown as they took a 16-3 lead heading into halftime. The Titans were only able to score 14 games throughout the game as Texans held on to a 23-14 victory. The next game of the week was between the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Indianapolis Colts, in which the Colts beat the Jaguars 26-23 in overtime. The Jaguars fall to 4-13, while the Colts are 8-9 to finish off the year. Mac Jones went 20 for 32 with 225 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Tanks Bigsby led the team in rushing with 39 yards and a touchdown. Brian Thomas Jr. led the team in receiving with 103 yards, and Parker Washington had a touchdown on the day. Joe Flacco went 23 for 40 with 264 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor led the team in rushing with 177 yards and a touchdown. Josh Downs led the team in receiving with 94 yards, and Alec Pierce had a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Colts touchdown on their opening drive, which was followed up by a Jaguars touchdown. Heading into halftime, Indianapolis had a 20-13 lead over the Jaguars, and in the second half, the Jaguars scored a touchdown to tie it up at 20, which was then followed by field goals by both teams as they were both tied at 23 apiece heading into overtime. The Colts got the ball to begin overtime and scored a field goal, and the Jacksonville Jaguars turnover on downs as the Colts held on to the victory. The next game of the week was between the Buffalo Bills and the New England Patriots, in which the Patriots beat the Bills 23-16. The Bills are 13-4, while the Patriots are 4-13. Mitch Trubisky started and went 15 for 21 with 101 yards and a touchdown. Mike White also played, going 3 for 11 and 28 yards. Ray Davis led the team in rushing with 64 yards. James Cook had 28 yards and a touchdown. Curtis Samuel went 54 yards, led the team, and Ray Davis had a touchdown on the day. Joe Milton III went 22 for 29 with 241 yards and a touchdown. Drake May went 0 for 1. Antonio Gibson led the team in rushing with 41 yards, and Joe Milton had a rushing touchdown. Kayshon Boutte led the team in receiving with 117 yards and a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Patriots touchdown, followed by a Bills touchdown, a Patriots touchdown, and then a Bills field goal, as New England had a 14-10 lead over Buffalo heading into halftime. The Bills then scored a touchdown, taking a 16-14 lead, which was then followed up by two Patriots field goals as they took a 20-16 lead, and later on in the game they scored another field goal as they had a 23-16 lead and held on for that victory with that scoreline. The next game of the week was between the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles, in which the Eagles beat the Giants 20-13. The Giants fall to 3-14. The Eagles are now 14-3. Drew Lock went 22 for 29 with 138 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Tyrone Tracy Jr. led the team in rushing with 59 yards. Malik Neighbors led the team in receiving with 64 yards and a touchdown on the day. Tanner McKee started for the Eagles, going 27 for 41 with 269 yards and two touchdowns. Will Shipley led the team in rushing with 32 yards on the day. Jahan Dotson led the team in receiving with 94 yards, and Aeneas Smith and E.J. Jenkins each had a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by the Eagles with a touchdown on their opening drive. Heading into halftime, they held a 10-0 lead over the Giants. The Giants then scored a field goal to open up the second half as the score was 10-3, and then the Eagles scored a touchdown followed up by a Giants touchdown as the score was 10-17 in favor of the Eagles. The Giants then scored another field goal to make it 13-7, but the Eagles capped it off with one final field goal to give us the final score of 20-13. The next game of the week was between the New Orleans Saints and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in which the Buccaneers beat the Saints 27-19. The Saints are 5-12 to end the year, while the Buccaneers are 10-7 and win the division heading into the playoffs. Spencer Rattler went 26 for 42 with 240 yards and a touchdown. Clyde Edwards-Helaire led the team in rushing with 26 yards. Jawan Johnson led the team in receiving with 80 yards, and Dante Pettis had a touchdown on the day. Baker Mayfield went 21 for 32 with 221 yards, two touchdowns, and an interception. Bucky Irving led the team in rushing with 89 yards and a touchdown. Mike Evans led the team in receiving with 89 yards, eclipsing 1,000 yards for the 11th straight season to start off his career. Jalen McMillan and Payne Durham each had a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Saints field goal as the teams exchanged field goals in the first quarter. Heading into halftime, the Saints had a 16-6 lead over the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers then scored a touchdown to begin the second half to make it 16-13. The Saints then scored a field goal to make it 19-13. Buccaneers scored two consecutive touchdowns to pull off the victory with a final score of 27-19. The next game of the week was between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Denver Broncos. The Broncos were in a win-and-in situation in which they defeat the Chiefs 38-0. The Chiefs fall to 15-2, while the Broncos are 10-7 and heading into the playoffs. The Chiefs started their backups for the entire game, and Carson Wentz went 10 for 17 with 98 yards. Carson Steele led the team in rushing with 25 yards, and Nico Remigio led the team in receiving with 48 yards. Bo Nix went 26 for 29 with 321 yards and 4 touchdowns. Bo Nix also led the team in rushing with 47 yards, and Audric Estime had a touchdown on the ground. Cortland Sutton led the team in receiving with 98 yards and a touchdown. Marvin Mims Jr. had 2 touchdowns, and Devon Vele also had a touchdown as well. The Broncos scored a touchdown on their opening drive and held a 24-0 lead over the Chiefs. They then scored 2 touchdowns in the second half as they pulled out the 38-0 victory over the Chiefs. The next game of the week was between the Las Vegas Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers, in which the Chargers beat the Raiders 34-20. The Chargers are 11-6 and get the 5 seed in the playoffs, while the Raiders fall to 4-13. Justin Herbert went 28 for 36 with 346 yards and 2 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins led the team in rushing with 63 yards. Hassan Haskins had a touchdown on the ground. Quentin Johnston led the team in receiving, having a career game with 186 yards on the day. Will Dissly and DJ Chark each had a touchdown on the day. Aiden O'Connell went 24 for 34 with 214 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Desmond Ridder went 1 for 2 with 11 yards. Alexander Madison led the team in rushing with 20 yards, and Jacoby Myers led the team in receiving with 123 yards and a touchdown. Brock Bowers also had a touchdown as well. The first points of the game were scored by the Raiders with a field goal, which was then followed up by 2 consecutive Chargers field goals and a Raiders touchdown, as heading into halftime the Chargers had a 17-10 lead over the Raiders. Both teams started off with field goals to start off the second half. The Chargers then scored 2 consecutive touchdowns, taking a 34-13 lead over the Raiders. The Raiders then scored a touchdown on their final drive as the Chargers pulled off the 34-20 victory over the Raiders. The next game of the week was between the New York Jets and the Miami Dolphins, in which the Jets beat the Dolphins 32-20. The Dolphins fall to 8-9, and the Jets are 5-12 to end the year. Tyler Huntley went 25 for 41 with 227 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Devon Achane led the team in rushing with 121 yards and a touchdown. Jonnu Smith led the team in receiving with 56 yards and a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers went 23 for 36 with 274 yards, 4 touchdowns, and an interception. Allen Lazard went 0 for 1. Breece Hall led the team in rushing with 57 yards, and Davante Adams led the team in receiving with 88 yards and a touchdown. Allen Lazard, Tyler Conklin, and Breece Hall each had a receiving touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a Miami field goal. Heading into halftime, the Jets had a 15-6 lead over the Dolphins, and then they carried on to score a total of 32 points as they pulled off the victory over the Dolphins. The next game of the week was between the Seattle Seahawks and the Los Angeles Rams, in which the Seahawks beat the Rams 30-25. Both teams end the year at 10-7, but the Rams got the edge and are winners of the divisions heading into the playoffs. Geno Smith went 20 for 27 with 223 yards and 4 touchdowns. Zach Charbonnet led the team in rushing with 59 yards. Noah Fant led the team in receiving with 63 yards and a touchdown. DK Metcalf and AJ Barner and Jake Bobo each had a touchdown on the day. Jimmy Garoppolo started and went 27 for 41 with 334 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Ronnie Rivers led the team in rushing with 48 yards, and Jordan Whittington led the team in receiving with 86 yards. Tyler Higbee and Tyler Johnson each had a touchdown on the day. The first points of the game were scored by the Seahawks with a touchdown, and heading into halftime, the Seahawks led the Rams 17-13. The Rams then scored a field goal on their opening drive in the second half to make it 17-16, which was then followed up by a Seahawks touchdown and a Rams touchdown, as the score was then 24-22. The Rams then scored a field goal to make it 25-24 with the lead. The Seahawks then answered with a touchdown to give us the final score of 30-25, as the Rams then had a turnover on downs on the next drive. The next game of the week was between the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers, in which the Cardinals beat the Niners 47-24. The Niners fall to 6-11. The Cardinals are 8-9 to finish off the year. Josh Dobbs started for the Niners, going 29 for 43 with 326 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Patrick Taylor led the team in rushing with 109 yards. Josh Dobbs also had a rushing touchdown on the day. Ricky Pearsall led the team in receiving with 69 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Juszczyk also had a receiving touchdown on the day. Kyler Murray went 25 for 35 with 242 yards and 4 touchdowns. Tony Jones Jr. led the team in rushing with 55 yards and a touchdown. Michael Carter also had a touchdown on the ground, as Trey McBride led the team in receiving with 65 yards and a touchdown. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Greg Dortch had a touchdown. Greg Dortch had 2 on the day. The first points of the game were scored by a 49ers field goal, and heading into halftime, Arizona had a 20-17 lead over the 49ers. The Niners only scored one more touchdown in the second half as the Cardinals added to the score and pulled off the 47-24 victory. The final game of the week and the final game of the 2024-2025 NFL regular season was between two 14-2 teams in the NFC North, the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions. And in this game, the Detroit Lions defeated the Vikings 31-9, as the Lions will get the number 1 seed in the NFC, and the Vikings fall to get the 5th seed in the NFC. The Vikings end the regular season off with a 14-3 record, while the Lions are 15-2. Sam Darnold went 18 for 41 with 166 yards. Cam Akers led the team in rushing with 65 yards. Justin Jefferson led the team in receiving with 54 yards on the day. Jared Goff went 27 for 33 with 231 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Jahmyr Gibbs led the team in rushing with 139 yards and 3 touchdowns. Amon-Ra St. Brown led the team in receiving with 77 yards, and Jahmyr Gibbs had a touchdown receiving as well. The first points of the game were scored by a Lions touchdown. Heading into halftime, Detroit led the Vikings 10-6. The Vikings only scored one more field goal in the second half as the Lions pulled away and pulled off this victory. And that recaps all 16 games for Week 18 here in the 2024-2025 NFL regular season. As we are now heading into the playoffs, those will be recapped and covered here on this channel, so stay tuned. Who do you guys think will win the Super Bowl, and what playoff matchups are you guys most excited for? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this type of content, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and I appreciate all the support as we are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. If you're a fan of the NFL and college football, stay tuned, as we'll be covering both all season long. Appreciate all the support, and we'll catch you in the next one. Take care.